When 2,000 people gathered on the White House lawn on July 26, 1990, for the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act, it was the largest gathering ever of journalists for a disability story. Activist and author Mary Johnson noted in Fairs Magazine Extra, though most of the reporters missed the fact that the White House itself lacked the accessible restrooms mandated by the act. Well, 25 years on, how much has changed in terms of coverage of people with disabilities? Beth Haller is professor of mass communication at Towson University and author of Representing Disability in an Ableist World. She runs the blog Media Dis and Dat, and she joins us now by phone. Welcome to CounterSpin, Beth Haller.
Thank you.
Well, I was pleased by the amount of attention that the Americans with Disabilities Act anniversary got, but there was something a little frustrating about the formula. You know, we've come a long way. There's still a long way to go, seems to be the angle. And I worry a little that sounds like it's accepting on the way to okay as okay. You know, it kind of lacks urgency and makes it sound like discrimination against people with disabilities is a problem, but maybe not a very high priority. But you have tracked coverage over time. Do you think things are really better now, not just in terms of the quantity of media attention, but in the quality or substance of that attention?
Yeah, I think since 2008, when the amendments were added, I think there's been more of an urgency on the part of the federal government to actually enforce the ADA. And I think that has gotten a little bit more media attention because the Department of Justice, EEOC, Department of Education, putting out press releases whenever they're going after somebody for ADA violations. So I think there's been some pretty good, consistent media coverage of that. But then also with the kind of dropping of traditional legacy media out of the picture, it's been a lot more of just kind of press releases from the federal government that are getting kind of media play, if you call the posting of things on the internet media play. So I think there's several things going on, both with the media and with more enforcement of the ADA. But I agree with you that I think it was great to see all the coverage of the ADA 25th anniversary, and I applaud all the media that did stories, but they can't just drop it now. They do anniversary stories almost every year now, and I think they did more now that it was the 25th anniversary. But I think in terms of actually covering disability rights and the ADA and other disability discrimination cases, they still need to keep after the coverage and make sure that they're covering this very important area of our society that just was ignored for so many years.
Lots of folks don't realize that enforcement of the ADA really is still an issue. You know, it didn't come with much funding for enforcement, and it always requires you have to sue. You know, there's something funny about a right that you have to bring a lawsuit in order to exercise. You know, it's all kind of based around legislation. And from the journalist perspective, it'd be great if they had some other modes of approaching these issues other than or in addition to around lawsuits.
It's not always happening that it's a lawsuit. I think, you know, sometimes the federal government is just going after a city or a business that they see has been in flagrant violation of the ADA for 25 years. So I think sometimes the threats are enough. Sad. I mean, I just think that that's the way it works in America. You know, lawsuits are the way that a lot of civil rights have happened. And I just think in particular, the disability community has had to use that because if you can't even get into the building to protest, it's better to get your lawyer to file a lawsuit. And I mean, I think nobody's writing about the fact that a lot of companies, local government, lots of institutions have just flagrantly violated the ADA for years. And that's like 25 years of non-compliance that I don't think we would put up with in a lot of other areas. And so I'm glad that the federal government is going after lots of places that haven't complied.
Absolutely. I wonder what you think. This might just be a personal thing of mine, but what do you think about the thing where the journalist uses a wheelchair for a day or for a few days and writes a story about that saying, you know, now I really understand? That's kind of one of my least favorite tropes in media coverage of disability issues is the "I was disabled for a day." Are there any stories like that or tropes in media that when you see them, you just grit your teeth, or that you'd like journalists to kind of drop in coverage of this issue?
Yeah, I think the disability community is very much against those spend a day or an hour in a wheelchair, because all it does is reinforce kind of pity narratives, and it doesn't build awareness. It just builds more negative attitudes toward people with disabilities. I think anything that is causing pity in the news media is not a good thing, because I think people already have a lot of misunderstanding about the disability experience in America, and they're already going at it from the wrong place. So if the media is reinforcing that, I think it's really a negative stigma that happens. To me, the flip side also is this kind of like super crip narrative where people are held up as inspirations. You know, there's a great video from the late Stella Young in Australia about the problems of applauding people for just getting up in the morning because they have a disability. That also, to me, is a problem, because then there's no expectations that people with disabilities are going to be part of our society and working in our jobs and, you know, our next door neighbors and running for office, doing all the other parts of societal work that everybody else does. If you just see them as like, oh, they got up out of bed, isn't that great? I think those are really problematic too, because again, you're already dealing with a lot of negative attitudes of the audience of the media. So I think they need to really step up in the news media and get to real, more nuanced stories about somebody's real experience. And that's why I think social media and the internet have really been a boon for the disability community, because now a lot more people with disabilities are writing their own stories, telling their own stories, and there's not that kind of filtering through the news media. But then it flips. So, you know, people are blogging or talking about their lives on social media, and then the news media comes calling. And I think when that happens, it comes from a different place, because the news media is getting kind of educated by the disabled writer, and then they go do a story, I think, with a little bit better understanding. So I'm a big proponent of what's going on with social networking from the disability community, because I think they've really harnessed it for good to kind of get their own stories out there. There was a Twitter discussion last week which the hashtag was just Our Disability Stories. And I think it was great. You know, the Smithsonian was involved, and a lot of the Disability Visibility Project was involved. And so there was just a lot of kind of focus on the real disability stories in America. And I think journalists probably got an education, if they read any of those too, about what the real story is, and hopefully story ideas for the future too.
Well, we'll end on that positive note. We've been speaking with Beth Haller of Towson University. Her book is Representing Disability in an Ableist World, Essays on Mass Media. Her blog is Media Dis and Dat. Thanks for joining us this week on CounterSpin, Beth Haller.
Appreciate it. Thank you.